There's an interesting statement floating around that everything happens for the best. And it's irritating sometimes. It's, like any other belief, got some merit at other times. And what I wanted to do was look at a couple of patterns of reality through that filter. So everything happens for the best. And let's look at one of the things that happens, because one of the things that occurs is complexity. Complexity grows, and the question is, how does it grow? And complexity grows at the intersection of the possibility field and the probability field in the refraction of human consciousness. So you have the infinite possibility field, and then we have the distinctions in the observing and measuring device of human consciousness, meaning we as a human consciousness observe and measure this infinite wave, and we can't process, we can't hold an infinite wave within the refracted lens of the human ego. And so what we do is we break it down into bits. Now, if you look at the beauty of the bicycle wheel, or the beauty of the wheel, and its infinite series of distinctions, and you break it down into 1, 2, 3, 4 points, there's going to be vibration. There's going to be pain. Now, the parts of the circle that are in the center may not feel all that amount of pain, and the parts that are included in this box may not suffer that much, but there's a division, meaning when you create a simplistic structure in consciousness, you have things that fit in and things that don't within the framework of polarity. And so you divide reality up into these different boxes. And they create pain because there is a lack of grace, meaning if you can imagine the multiverse as a series of spheres, as a series of systems that energy flows into and energy flows out of. Well, when it flows in as a nice circle and flows out, you've got a lot of grace. And some of it sticks in the circle, and you've got this infinite series of curves. It's a beautiful framework of distinctions. If there's any distinction at all, it's in that liminal space between particle and wave. You've got a graceful ride. But we're born into cultures that don't have the capacity to hold anything like that number of distinctions. And so we break things up, like there's school, and there's work, and there's free time. And what's this? Well, this is whatever, play. That's your life. Well, energy comes into that system, and it takes a really hard angle here. It's hard work to push the energy around that curve, and it's hard work to push it around here. And it's clunky when it's moving. And it's, I don't want to go from play into school, and I can't wait to get out of here. And, there's all these asymmetries that create tension. the energy has to flow through, or there's death, which there's a certain amount of that. It has to flow through or there's death, but how does it flow through? How much friction? You can imagine this like a plumbing system where you take this wonderful sphere, flows very nicely, then you shrink it down. You ignore a lot of the dimensions and you shrink it down, and then you run it at a right angle here and then like this and like this. And every time that happens, the water pressure decreases and it builds up in the pipes. It's hard on the pipes. You have knocking pipes sometimes. And eventually it leaves the system or bursts through the pipes. This is what we have when we have dis-ease, for example. So this system is going on, and what happens is we become aware. Well, first of all, there's a complexity dynamic that's always going on, because there's also a sensitivity dynamic that's always going on. Now, the sensitivity dynamic is the zoom lens in consciousness. It's also the zoom lens in biology, meaning if you have a darkened room, even your eyes adjust, and even a tiny little bit of light feels blinding. If you're in a bright sunlit day and you go into a darkened room, you can't even see that little bit of tiny light, or you can't see it certainly in the bright day, because it's all about relativity. And so we've got a trajectory in which complexity is being added as sensitivity increases. So why is that happening? Well, the consciousness in the body can only stand so much sensitivity, so much complexity. But the more complexity and the more sensitivity, the more sensitivity, partly you get the more complexity, because the folks of 300 or 400 years ago may have been feeling quite luxurious in hard-rimmed wooden wagon wheels with a little strip of, what was it, a hard wood going over cobblestones. But the person today getting into a Tesla electric car, one of the finest vehicles in the world, is going to, this back seat in this one area of my back is just, we could improve there. And this is also the direction of evolution. So as energy comes through human consciousness, it starts out crude and it starts out insensitive, and it starts out simple and unevolved and very painful. You want beans or no beans. It's kind of black or white. You get married or you're not married. It's kind of black or white. You have, very crude things. Are you with us or are you against us? And it's like, it's very painful. It's like, I'm with you here, but I'm not with you here. And that bit is good in theory, but not in this context. It's like, none of that. You're with us or against us. It's painful. You can divide an entire world into two warring factions by being crude, by being simplistic. And so what happens is, as pain comes in, it's painful. Painful is telling us that there's a poor fit between the structure and the energy. The water's complaining about making this curve here. So you knock off the curve. And you add a thing here. It's still got to go through the entire revolution. Every single bit of energy needs to go through the full expression of its potential. But it can be done with more grace, with more awareness, with more complexity. And they're synonymous. Grace, awareness, complexity are synonymous, meaning it's a more graceful ride to drive that wheel than that wheel. It's a more complex ride. A sphere, a circle, are an infinite number of lines, and so, you're up into the trillions of lines. And you can come up with even more, but it's too hard to hold in consciousness. So what we're looking at is the capacity, what we can hold in our consciousness. So the complexity, of course, increases with the distinction. The more complex, the more distinctions. The more distinctions, the more grace. Evolution is the process of moving from simplicity to complexity, from pain to grace. And the question is simply this balance point of, there's this tension, because you could just say, well, let's just jump to the circle, right? And you can't hold it, so you've got unconsciousness. And you pierce the veil with unconsciousness. You say, wait. I don't know about all this stuff. I don't know this, that, the other. But this is a hand. And this is not a hand. I can grasp that. This is a piece of chalk and this is a board. Now, of course, it's a lot more complex than that. If you look through multiple different paradigms and lenses, those seemingly two separate, distinct things become a whole variety of different things, and an infinite number of things. You can go into, this isn't a piece of chalk, it is, 10 billion of these atoms and 20 trillion of these atoms and this and that, the other, and then this isn't this, it's, it didn't just move, no, the atoms changed along the way. And one of the interesting things is the idea of, Rupert Sheldrake has been talking about field consciousness. And, and this ties in with the idea that individual atoms don't move out of the way, particularly at the subatomic level, but rather that a field holds the space. Meaning the field is holding this form, and all of the different particles and spaces are readjusting to become parts and not parts as the field of intention and energy shifts. And so then it's harder to say, what's the difference between this and this when they're the same particles. It's like stem cell particles or stem cells that can become any part of the body depending on where they're needed, which is one of the reasons they're so popular for regenerative health. So we have the process of pain leading to the process of complexity. So the more pain there is, the more unhappy you will be with the system. And it's designed that way. It's telling you don't have a very complex relationship with the field. And so you say, okay, well, I'm going to have, I'm not going to just, bright or off, there'll be a dimmer. And as I'm getting sleepy, we'll dim it down in the daytime. So we'll add a dimmer. Well, that's a bit of complexity. Before there wasn't even any light. Well, now we're going to have 6 sconce lights in the room rather than before there was one oil lamp and then there was one electric light in the center. It's like, no, let's light that a little bit more. Let's put the attention here. It's a continuous process of complexity. And we're leading that process through the external world, meaning we are creating literally billions and billions of distinct products in an increasing array of complexity, such that with 3D printing and nanotechnology, we may reach a point where every single item is customized, where there's no a pair of shoes, where every single shoe is unique, period. Both in its quality, in its color density, in its feel and in its size and in the exact makeups of its material, with infinite trade-offs from, a fabulous short-term presence, like, an explosion of color and blossom, to something that can last, 1,000 years. But it has other trade-offs that preclude, so there's an infinite number of tensions between all of these different polarities of values, cost, durability. And we're used to things like certain sizes, like, are you a size 9 or a size 10? What about a size 3,011th? 2 millimeters to the left in this area, a little bit more in the left in that area. See, then we're in an entirely different field of mathematics, where suddenly things have become a lot more complex. So, what if rather than 200 countries, there are 1 billion cultures and 1 billion countries, with 5 to 10 people in each one, in engaging in a certain way? That's a much more sophisticated framework, particularly, and you get to things like superintelligence or artificial intelligence. What if the human conscious mind cannot hold the framework of a complexity that sophisticated, but an AI can? In other words, what if an AI invites you into a microculture that is the exact fit for who you are as a human being, for the greatest potential to develop your gifts? And you say, well, it doesn't make sense to me that if I focus my whole, presence on making certain ambient sounds, let's just say you're a sound artist, and you're invited into a culture with 5 other people where your entire specialty for a lifetime is creating ambient sound and harmony and synergizing that with thought. Well, you might say, well, how's that going to support itself? And you don't know the answer. You might ask your parents, how would me making sound, I love the idea, that's so me, but how's that? I just feel I've never felt so alive as when I sing sounds, and when I sing it with this particular person, it's just magical. And it would be such a reverie, such an ecstasy, such a beauty, such an exquisite art form to develop that for 30 years. Well, your parents don't know. You don't know. Your neighbors don't know. If you go to the city clerk and say, I'd like to sing for the next 30 years, they say, well, we don't have any singing jobs around here. And so that culture, that talent, that repertoire of energy doesn't exist in our cult, in our culture. But what if an AI has the processing capacity to recognize talents from microbiology since birth? What if an AI, not limited to the processing capacity of the human brain, has the capacity to understand your facial expressions, cross-referencing that with 20 billion other human beings, and say that these people who have this kind of a voice, who respond with eye movements when this kind of a voice is spoken, who seem to slightly close their eyes and listen, who prioritize sound over the other senses, who come alive with music. Of course, in a world of witnessing, in a world of transparency, it's going to be the processing center behind all the cameras that notices these trends. And if it's asked to look out for your best interest, it's going to say, aha, this person has what it takes to do this very well. Well, if it's programmed in mathematics and economics, it's also going to know who the buyer is. It's going to know the few people around the world who value exquisite sound, who are perhaps healed and integrated by sound more than anyone else. It's going to notice that, okay, you went into that dance hall with a flu, and you were so alive, and you came so much into yourself that you walked out and your temperature was healthy. And then you did it again when you went to this dance over here, and you did it again when you played this kind of music at home. And the AI is going to inform you, you are healed by sound. You have never been happier by these metrics, vitality and skin color. Eyes making low stress movements, smile density, meaning when you do this, you smile at 60 smiles an hour. When you do this, you never smile. And so obviously the metrics need to be refined in a way that isn't meaningful to you and I right now, because we can't keep track of it. We can barely keep track of the complexity of a talk like this. And yet, here we are. And when the AI, which has no time, which has no computing limit, which has no barrier to the amount of intimacy, the amount of nuance that it can process, can recognize a buyer who would pay any amount of money for sound that beautiful, for the energy that induces, perhaps in preference for live, meaning they want to engage with the artist, so they put on the VR headset, and the artists, the sound artists, get the alert that there's a buyer who would pay anything for that quality of sound. And depending on what's being interrupted and what's going on and the value placed, put on their own VR headset. And of course, microphone technology, more sophisticated than it is today by 1,000 times. Maybe VR more sophisticated in its vibratory impact, its ability to transmit sound through touch, through floor pad vibration, through massage, through synchrony. And the two come together. A group of 5, a client of 2, a romantic evening, and the AI that promised a buyer for sound that exquisite, and the AI that promised sound that exquisite to those specific individuals who value that sound above all else, has created a niche market of 10 individuals on the planet to live their ideal life. And so they do. And 10 feet away, 100 feet away in another space, there is another niche that you don't know about, but another 10 people do, another 20, another 1,000, have just been nursed into complexity using the synthesizing talent of an AI that transcends our ability to recognize it. I mean, in hindsight and on an individual and small level, of course it makes sense that I love singing. Doesn't everyone love singing? And of course it makes sense that I would enjoy doing what I enjoy doing. And of course it makes sense that somewhere on the planet, there's someone who loves that kind of singing. And of course it makes sense that they would want to hear my singing. And so value is exchanged. Nourishment is exchanged. And the system can be as complex as it can possibly be. It is infinitely complex. One day, a child may be born and the AI says, I have never seen anything like this pattern before. And an entire culture, an entire possibility or probability field given birth to enable that form. In our culture, it's too simple. It is a baby. I don't have time to think about it. I don't have time to care for it. Who knows what's going on there? Get it out of the living room. It's making too much noise. And we're going to do this because that's what people do. It's very crude and it's very painful. We have a cult filled with numbness, isolation, invisibility, frustration. And every one of these points, the invitation to complexity within the framework of technology that we are just developing. We are just developing, meaning it didn't make much sense to have so many genres of music until we had 4,000 songs on our iPhone. Now it is. Now it does make that kind of sense. It didn't make sense to have 300 different types of exercise and different diets and this and that and the other. But all of that makes sense to one degree or another in specific cases. But what's different as we continue to develop technology is in the old advertising adage, we know that 50% of all that we do doesn't work. And this is an old adage, and it indicates complexity. The old ad execs say, we know that 50% of all advertising money is wasted. We just don't know which 50%. And so you got to spend the whole 100% to get the 50% and know that half of it's wasted. Well, now things have gotten more complex. Why? The internet, devices, they've gotten more complex. And so now you know exactly which ads are wasting money and which don't, because you can trace the call back to this or that or the other. The advertiser knows, and Facebook, etc., raises those prices, and and so you'll pay those prices. And then these other areas where it's like this demographic does not buy my service, they become almost worthless as advertising spots for that product. So again, if it's intelligently done rather than invest in a worthless area, Facebook would figure out who that demographic would really like to be marketed from. So in that framework, we have a process of endless complexity. And one of the things that's difficult in this process is, for example, the distinctions between nature and technology. And this is built upon the framework that we're not part of nature. That even though nature produced us with the same algorithm that it produced everything else, the endless process of complexity, because human beings are nature's complexity-making machines, devices, organs. Through the human being, there is a tremendous explosion in technological complexity. And in many cases, in our current crude way of working with the environment, there is an implosion in the complexity of the ecology. So we take vast prairie fields and replace them with monocrops of corn. We've taken thousands of species in complex interrelationships, destroyed all those relationships, and planted a monocrop of a single type of corn, which is harvested at a single time of the year. It's a movement towards simplicity. And yet, through that simplicity, putting a strain on nature, every time you simplify an ecology, you put a strain on the body, on nature. You know, it's you can think of that strain also like you've got nothing and then you're carrying 400 pounds. You know, it's on the one it's too light, on the other it's too much. If you lift 400 pounds in both, you know, and you take a pound of this and you just do this 200 times, a pound each, you've got a more complex relationship with the mass, and it's neither too little or too much, because you divided the 400 pounds into 400 separate 1 pound things that you can relate to. So now you've taken something that's very difficult. You either have nothing or you're carrying 400 pounds and you've worked it in small bits. It's very similar to, you know, what would help a teenager that has a $30 allowance a week start investing. Well, you know, you can't go to a brokerage, walk in, sit down, hand over $1, make pleasantries. They put the dollar into a till, and you know, and then you charge a $6 commission on that transaction. It doesn't work. But when you integrate it with app technology, with 30-cent commissions or 0 commissions in exchange for advertising, etc., now teenager gets $30, one tap away, they can start learning about investing, and they can create a product, in this case, an investment portfolio, few taps at a time, in $1, $2, $10 increments. And they can watch that evolve over time and see what's happening. And they can then look over at their friends who aren't doing it and seeing what's happening in their life. And their friends who aren't doing it can look over to them and say, wow, this is happening in a way that was not visible before because the friend wasn't available. They worked at that. You know, so there's an endless process of, with complexity comes more choice. Now, the science suggests, of course, that when we have more choice, we're more dissatisfied because we can't put the answer to rest that we made the best choice. And that's one of the things that we need to get rid of with a certain extent with complex thinking, is that there is no best choice. There's a best choice from this angle or that angle at a given moment. And it's on a gradient. And so based on any given value at any given moment, oh, right now I've got a headache, you know, and that's, my eyes hurt right now. And they've hurt for the last couple of hours. And I'm looking at a light source. And yet, I'm not aware of that when I'm in the flow of this symmetry. It's so exciting. It's so satisfying that this is the best choice for me at this moment, in this context, at this time, etc. And so we've got this movement towards complexity, this movement towards evolution, this movement towards sensitivity, this movement towards grace. And we've got a correlation between pain and simplicity. And we have the phenomena, and just to finish the thought, there's this idea that we're separate from nature. But we are nature. And then there's the idea that machines are separate from us. But nature created us, and we created machines. It's all natural. There is always a phenomena that that which is created destroys the creator. And that's evolution, because the next iteration is always more complex than the last iteration. But it would be a mistake, for example, until we have sentient machines to consider a machine more complex than a human being, because of the consciousness and the emotional dimension, the biological dimension. We have feelings, and that's one of the most amazing and beautiful things, about us that gives meaning. Machine doesn't have choice. It just follows its code. We do. We have this wonderful dance that is incredibly complex, and that complexity can be augmented with machine technology. And it can augment us in a variety of ways that we're already experiencing. I mean, from earrings, that's an augmentation. A ring, that's an augmentation. A filling in a tooth is an augmentation. Rather than having a cavity or yanking that tooth out, let's add a bit of technology. A necklace, a pair of clothes, it's all technology. Language, it's technology. A phone, it's a technology. Computer, a camera, a blackboard, it's all technology. And as the technology gets more sophisticated, it allows human consciousness to become more sophisticated. Now, as it becomes more sophisticated, it becomes more sensitive. Why? Because you've got to zoom in. See, at 30 yards, you can say that's a blackboard with some stuff on it. But, at 5 yards and less, you start seeing circles and this, and then when you're up close, you can read the words. And it's only when you take someone's making some talking and saying something down to, wow, he's saying that thought in that way, in this word, in this moment, in this way, that the full potential is realized. And yet it's pain that pushes us back into numbness, into dissociation, into the traumatic brain, which is the crudest of brain, fight, flight, freeze. The traumatic brain. And this is why eliminating trauma from the species as a whole is one of the single most potent ways to evolve the planet. When you eliminate trauma, people engage and enter their bodies more and become more attuned to nuance. As they do so, they observe the infinite complexity of their environment. As they do so, their thinking develops. As their thinking develops, their language develops. As their language develops, their imagination develops. And the whole thing happens all over again. They use that technology to refine and create a more sophisticated rendition of reality, a more graceful interaction with the ecology. And on the other side of that, deeper sensitivity emerges. Sensitives are also a biological phenomena. Nature has always produced 10% or so of human beings and other mammalian species as being unusually sensitive. Why? So that the non-sensitive people understand that there's a direction to move in. So that, and you need the full range, because changing reality often is very painful, particularly with the crudeness of the frameworks in place. But you have sensitives that see and hear and imagine things that others don't, and feel things. And then other people become sensitized. As they become sensitized, their world expands because they're using a zoom-in lens. If I keep zooming in, this stops being a phone and becomes a billion atoms. That's more complex. Now, if you can develop a relationship with a billion atoms, particularly an influential relationship, you've got infinite possibilities. But you can't begin developing that relationship until you perceive the world at that level of magnification. So we have a direction towards evolution, complexity, sensitivity, grace. And this is happening on its own. And it's part of a process, and it's fought with overwhelm, laziness, entropy, meaning there's some part of the brain that doesn't want to see the phone as 10 billion things and calculate 10 billion things and this and that and just says that's a phone. There's some part of the brain that doesn't want to calculate that there's 10 billion different versions of human beings and just says you're a man, you're a woman, let's get it over with. And doesn't want the sophistication. I don't want to analyze my meal as it through this. I just want to eat something. Just give me some food. And so there's this need for rest, for resting in the simplicity and the unconsciousness, however painful. I'll just take a few beers and it'll all go away. I need some rest. And so that's you have these tension points between rest and complexity. This is also the known and the unknown. The unknown is always vastly bigger than the known. So, we operate at different times on these continuums. Some people go to sleep because it's just too complex to figure out how to respond to all this. Some people bottle the energy up, but the energy has to be allowed to flow through, and it'll be easier on the body and easier on the larger ecology the more distinctions are employed. So what else do we have in this thing around everything working for the best? Well, within this framework, you can say that everything is as complex as the human mind is capable of engaging with for now, meaning it's painful when we're simple. So if we could create that level of complexity, we would have. So if we haven't created that level of complexity, it's because it's too fast for the conscious mind. I mean, the conscious mind gets overwhelmed. It's like you have to invent new language, you have to invent new concepts, you have to figure out how this 1/1000th of thing interacts with the whole rest of the world, how that ties in with the laws of physics, how that ties into the laws of good taste in this culture, what I'm supposed to be stereotyped as a gender. How does it fit in with all that? I don't know. I don't want to think about it. And so there's that whole direction, and there's the fact that you can infinitely explore distinctions. And so reality already is functioning at the level of complexity of which we are capable and willing to engage with. Now, every single time this all seems comfortable, fine, and then huge sharp angle. It's like, come on, I don't like that. Everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. I don't like that. And everything's fine. And we go around this a few times. And eventually we start to anticipate this hard turn. And we say, I have an idea. I hate that hard turn. Let's build a new road. Coming along, and then we're going to go here, and I'm pretty sure we're going to intersect with it over here. Okay, now we're gone through there, and then we're going to do it over here. Now over here, I don't know how to do it, so we're going to keep along. But we've just increased the complexity of the flow by 66% with doing these two little things. And then pretty soon it's like, I don't like that. I want to go like that. And then like that. And then maybe it'd be even better if I went out like that, so it wasn't quite so sharp. And it gradually moves towards a circle because that's what's most graceful. In that graduated movement, with each little turn, you have a new distinction. I'm going to do this for this reason. And we've got to remember and map this out in language because that's where we hold our consciousness, is in language, which is a series of distinctions. And so you have very graceful conversations using, 20,000 word vocabularies, and you have very crude vocations that say, yeah, dunno, yeah, dunno. No. That's all I can take for right now. No, absolutely nothing. And you don't enter the space as an artist, so there's no grace. You don't go out of a conversation like that energized. You go out drained because it's so crude. And so language helps to pave the way for distinctions, just as distinctions help to pave the way to language. Because it's through the body. If you're paying attention, for example, as you're driving and you're coming along straight, nice road and you feel the car almost flip over, that's what gives you the cue to say, let's not do that. Let's build a road that goes here. And yes, it's going to be difficult, but once we build a road that goes here, then that'll be less difficult on my body. And then we start developing the language called degrees, and then radiuses. And all of these are distinctions because your body feels differently as you go through reality, engaging in all these different ways. So now you've got gradients and distinctions. So, and this rule is constantly present in the collective. However, when you have a collective, what you have is a probability field. And what you have is some people are going to be on this straight line. Let's turn this into a system of population. And this is a system of statistics. And so, for example, in the United States, 30% of all domestic relationships have domestic violence. Well, so in the United States, you've got one person not being violated, one person not being violated, and then this person is being violated. And it goes around again. That's the system. Now, what's producing that statistical probability field is the system. It's not the people. Meaning, the system that produces 33% violence in domestic relationships is a system of no emotional literacy in school, shadow avoidance within the culture as an expression of shame, shame illiteracy in the culture, capitalism as the primary metric of value, money being the primary metric of value, and that competition and the fact that and work getting more attention than domestic relationship building. It's seen as perfectly great in the United States that you drive off and 12 hours home later you return home exhausted from a job that you hate. That system right there creates an enormous amount of violence, because that is a system of violence in which you have someone doing something they hate beyond their comfort and physical body. It's repetitive, so it's a very crude system. Let's have people just move this muscle and this muscle, not do the full range of the whole system. So it's a system that destroys the individual and then puts two destroyed individuals together at the end of the day. And they've had it when it comes to saying, I do not want to learn about what you mean about my behavior here and here and here. Go fuck off. So there's your clue. The system creates a probability field. Now, once you buy into a system, your only choice is, and you've got a 33% chance of being in here, is, first of all, if you're not aware of the system, you have no choice. You're just going to end up in one of these positions. So, but the thing is that the system demands that 30% of people. It's like a mathematic. It's a mathematical formula. Meaning, if I do 1 plus 3 minus 2 equals 2. If you treat infants like this, have no paid maternity leave, put people in jobs they hate, spend the majority of the time doing those jobs because you measure their value based on the money they make from the jobs, not on the contribution to the culture or any other things, you are going to end up with this number. The only question is, who's going to be in what role? So we've got 3 roles in this system. You got 3, in a 33% probability field, you have 3 roles. So one person is going to play this, one person is going to play this, one person is going to play this role. Now, who's going to get the best parts within a crappy play? Meaning a third of the people are going to be miserable in this play. Who's going to play the good roles? The people who can compete the best to play the good roles. Because if you go and, if there's 3 people and they enter a system, and the system says one of you is going to be the CEO, the other one's going to be the CEO's assistant, and the other person is going to be the grunt person, because that's how we've designed the system. We need a grunt person, a manager of the grunt person, and the visionary. Well, which would you rather be? So everyone would rather have the best part. But who gets the best part? The person most able to compete within social ranking. And who's the most likely person to compete? It varies. Richard Nixon was, and it varies because there's so many different ways of splicing it. Because one thing you could say is that the most miserable job on the planet is being the president of the United States. You're guaranteed to be hated. You're guaranteed to fail to make a large percentage of people happy. You are guaranteed not to know what you're doing in a large number of areas, but you will be expected to put on a good show about all that. And then you're guaranteed to work 18-hour days and not make a ton of money and all that. And so it's a miserable job on some level. So the question is, is that a winning or not? But someone who's desperate for approval within a traditional system is likely going to push themselves to extraordinary degrees to get that role. Same as in Hollywood. Who's going to end up here? It is likely that it is going to be someone who has perhaps a sociopathic tendency to figure out the system, perhaps to be very lucky, very beautiful, or well-connected, but it's going to, that person is going to end up in the role. Now, one of the interesting things with crude, painful systems is the process of constant repeating of the worst people getting the worst roles because they get the worst roles. So what I mean by this is, in the United States, if you're an incest survivor, which the United States produces a noticeable percentage of incest survivors, if you are one of them, you are guaranteed in this particular culture to have a much harder time of it. You're also guaranteed secrecy, meaning this is a culture where you will never be asked by your government, are you an incest survivor? No one's going to come around at 5 years old and put you in a safe room and say, we're not going to tell anyone, and there's going to be a magical grandmother there if you need to go to a wonderful, safe person. So are you an incest? Oh, you are. Okay, well, let's rescue you, and we're going to send you to a place where we know how to treat incest survivors and build your esteem, and you'll be healthier than ever before. No, that's not what we do. You're guaranteed secrecy. But your faults will express themselves. Really, the faults of the parent who's abusing you will express themselves. Your parent's faults will express themselves through your behavior. You'll have reduced grades. You'll be more nervous at school. So you'll be less popular because people don't instinctively like being around nervous people. So you will be less popular. And in a free system where there's a political influence, the popular one gets the best part. That's how it works. So you got dumped into a system that ensured that X percentage of the population would be an incest survivor and ensured that nobody would know about it, or if they did, they would hurt you with it. And then you weren't very popular as a result, so you get the worst role. So you go from getting the message from your parent that you weren't valuable enough to protect, because good parents don't fuck their kids. You didn't get that message. You got the message that you're expendable, so I'm going to use you. And then your feelings are expendable, so we're not going to tell anyone. And then your whole life is expendable, so we're not going to do anything as a parent to clean up the mess. Now go off and run your life. And then we say the same thing at school. We're not going to get to know you and fight for your restoration of this and that and the other. We're just going to see who's the popular one, and they're going to get the top role. So then you're going to get the bottom role. And then you're going to feel more pain. And the message deepens that you're worthless because you've got the bottom role. And then you start to believe it more, which means you try less. So the next time there's a role, everyone says, well, they don't try very much, and you get the bottom role again. And so we have a system that creates chronic suffering in different demographics of people, number one. Number two, we have a system that punishes the people who are punished the most. And we have a competitive system so that the people who are the most popular Or, take intelligence. You can't develop in school when your mother's being beaten at home. The teacher's saying, C is for cat. Now, if you've just got sandboxes and little flowers and some nice organic cooking at home, C is for cat is very interesting. Wow. Okay. But if your brother is raping your sister and your dad is beating your mom, you've got more on your mind than C is for cat. You're wondering, what the fuck is so crazy about this world that even when we know this is going on, the teacher doesn't want to talk about my mom being fucked up. She wants to talk about a squiggly line and a cat. Now, an intelligent student stuck in an abusive home has to ask themselves, what's more important, figuring out how to deal with the abuse that not a single grown-up around me is doing anything about? That every single person in this culture is conspiring to keep secret? Or a cat that isn't even there, it's just being drawn on the blackboard? Well, of course, kids are more intelligent than their teachers. So the kid focuses on how to survive the abuse, not on the cat that doesn't even exist. As a result, their school grades plummet. But the kid doesn't realize they're smarter than the teacher because they're told that the teacher is smart. So when the kid gives them an F because they were too busy worrying about how to protect their mom than focusing on non-existent cats, the kid thinks that they're dumb for being smarter than the teacher. And the ignorance and stupidity of the culture is passed on to the kid, who is then shamed and isolated, which adds a new crisis. How the fuck, even before I was shamed and isolated, I didn't know how to stop my dad beating my mom. Now I've got everyone else punishing me because I was thinking about the important thing. How do you deal with that as a 10-year-old? It's too big of a problem. So you're even more self-absorbed. So then watch where you're going, and then laughter, and you have being ground into the powder of waste, the powder of pain, the markers that tell us something's wrong with the system. And there is always something wrong with the system. Until 90% of the human experience is qualified by positive emotion, there's always something wrong with the system. And when something is wrong with the system, you have a dividing point. You either shame and punish, or you learn. So-and-so experiences pain. Mrs. Roberts, I don't have any more pencils. Well, I gave you 10 pencils. Yeah, but so-and-so stole those pencils, and then this person did this, and then you took us out here, and my bag got gone, and I don't have any more pencils. Well, Mrs. Roberts has a system that doesn't work. And she has a choice. She can tell that 7-year-old, I'm sorry, that sounds like a difficult situation. And I don't know what to do about it because I have 5 other difficult situations here given to me in a classroom that's too big for me to respond to in a system that doesn't make a lot of sense, called education. And we need to get our act together, and I don't know how to do that because if I complain to the director, I'll be fired because they don't want to hear about problems any more than I want to hear about yours. So you have this deciding point when you encounter the pain and deficiency in the system. And the deciding point is whether to shame and blame and concentrate the defects of the system in one person, or whether to learn, own, and share the load. Meaning, look, we're all in a fucked up system. This is the best we know how to do for now. And since we are in a fucked up system, there's on any given day, there's, we've got 10 chairs and there's 11 of you. So we're going to take it in turn. And one of you is going to sit on the floor until we get another chair. There's 3 laptops and all of you would like to use one. So we'll pass it around. And this is how we'll share the load of the faulty system. And of course, in the gamification of life, there's always someone trying to get a disproportionate amount of the positive part of the system and not have the cost of changing the system. And this is destructive, because if you can create a world, like if the politicians don't have to abide by their own rules, and they just get to go in a straight area, take a nice little helicopter and go on this straight area, take a nice little helicopter and go here, then they're no longer interested in solving this painful point that everyone else has to deal with. And so it's, and this is the nature of the corruption of power. The basis of leadership is we give you our authority and our money and our time and our trust, and you're supposed to make the system better. It's hard work making a system better. It's very easy to take some of that money and power and make things better for us. So that's generally what is done, because the system of concentrating power is in of itself flawed. It's a flawed system because of a flawed technology. We don't have app technology allowing us to make the decisions in our town on a daily basis. The politicians don't particularly want, or the public servants don't particularly want app technology determining architectural sales and planning processes and stuff. They love to sit there with their $10, $20, $30, $50,000 permits and reviewing stuff that takes 6 months just to look at a piece of paper and run you around here and do there and stuff, and makes them feel important. So they do. So, and they always vote, for funds for their renovation before repairing the streets or this and that and the other. So you have a system that needs to be repaired. And you have a tension between the people going through the pain of that bit of the system and the people who aren't going through it. Because if you've finally gotten out of the pain, like, oh, I went through that years ago, I don't want to spend time with that person, I know what they're going through. I finally gotten a nice bit of stretch road. Let's hope that we can just sail ahead. And then you have the simplistic thinking of, if I ignore other people's suffering and just sail ahead, then then I'll be free, right? And so I'm not going to invest in changing the system, which means the system stays the same, which means we hit the next bend, and so does our children, and it doesn't evolve. And then we develop a little bit of vision, and so we say, okay, even though it doesn't feel good now, I'm going to work now to make things a little bit better later. So the point is that the collective species and field of intelligence demands suffering at these points. If there's no suffering, the system doesn't change. Now, the best thing that the sufferers can do is transfer the suffering back to the majority. The worst thing the majority can do is constantly diffuse the suffering to the minority, because then the system stays the same. The system will round out the more rapid and intelligent the communication is from the sore points created by the system's probability field and the pleasure points. And you will have violence, disease, revolution, and all that if you do not tend to the weak points in the system. And you can think of this in terms of, for example, what's happening in the US around disease, where the wealthy minority will have health insurance and take best precautions and buy good food and this and that and the other. And then there's the 1% who are homeless. So millions of people wandering around, hunted by the police, outcast. So their immune systems are down, they're depressed, they've got PTSD, they're cold, they're not clean. So the diseases in the environment enter through this 1%. Naturally, diseases are not bigots. Diseases are opportunists. They're entrepreneurs. So they don't look for the place that's hardest to penetrate and say, yeah, let's spend all of our energy trying to attack these healthy rich people. No. They say, look, let's attack these people that the rich people are too dumb to protect. It's all the same species. Once we get a foothold in them, we'll mutate and then we'll move over to the rich people. It's easy. So if you don't take care of the extreme points in your minorities, the rot enters the system. The healthiest systems, everyone in the power structure's primary concern is the fringes. That's like the heart's effort to keep the extremities of the body warm. If the heart is too dumb and says, why send that heat out to those cold parts of the body? It feels painful out there. Let's just keep all the heat in here for me. The rest of the body dies, gets frostbite, dies, and the heart dies with it. It's that simple. You protect the extremities. And those are the minorities within any culture. So the culture needs people in the roles of pain because they are flags that say this system needs to evolve. This is not a symmetrical system yet. So these people are the most important people marking where the culture needs to evolve. This needs to be chopped off here and it needs to be added here. So the role of someone who's in pain is to communicate about it. And hopefully in a way that illuminates the system, because you've got two responses to pain. One is to say, okay, you're whining. You come over into the flat bit so that we don't have to listen to you, and we'll put some other poor schmuck over in the corner here, and they'll be miserable, and we'll try and shush them all up, and then, when they start whining eventually, then we'll put someone else there, and we'll protect and preserve the system, and we'll sacrifice the people, usually the most vulnerable people, people that are grateful to be hurt. The need for connection, the need for stimulation is so strong that very low-ranking and isolated people will be grateful to be hurt. So they'll take the crappy role. And they won't complain about it, which is the problem, because then the system doesn't evolve. So if you're in a pain point, one of the best things that you can do is to advocate for the evolution of the system. And that is what will change the probability field. And that's what will change how many millions of people in a given country are experiencing pain versus well-being in that domain. So if you do nothing and just go along, the system will evolve slowly, chronically, painfully. People will find themselves in the crap points of the system, and every system has crap points. Because even if you're in a system like this, which is, of course, much better, got a lot more sophistication, a lot more roles, so you're going to be in one of these points. This is a more difficult point than here. You're going to experience friction at this transit point. And that's really what we're looking at, is how sharp and how much friction is at the transit point. As you go from childhood to adolescent, do you get lessons? Do you get lessons on courtship? I mean, 500 years ago, royalty, certainly, but would be tutored into courting. Not our 10-year-olds. They're introduced to porn. It's dysfunctional. So, so how is the transition made from one role to another? From being in jail to being integrated into the culture. How's that transition? Oh, we just dump people out in the street with, $20? Great transition, isn't it? See, when you create painful, hard-fork transitions, people get stuck. When you create stagnant pools of water, disease grows. That's the nature of life. Stagnation facilitates disease. Flow facilitates health. The wheel, the circle, the most complex form, stimulates flow and stimulates health, stimulates well-being. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that there are specific human beings somewhere on this planet that are absolutely riveted by this particular dialogue. If you're very lucky, you're one of them. But there's no matrix to facilitate this right now. With an artificial intelligence, it can connect in more intricate distinctions than we are capable of framing in many ways, and introduce people through compatibilities that they don't have the sophistication to understand. At which point we have a choice whether to move towards unconsciousness again, in just trusting the system. Because we are in a system right now. We are in a vast system that is highly unconscious. And the system was built by us. And it's very unconscious. I don't know why I did this. I don't know why that happened. I wasn't expecting that. I don't like this job, but I don't know what to do about it. And there is a flow. And we don't know quite how to relate to that flow and that call to adventure that comes and pulls us. When we're going here, that says maybe you could go out here on a bigger arc and come back in this way. We say that's the unknown. I don't like the unknown because I'm a trauma survivor, and trauma is always correlated with the unknown. The more trauma you have, the more terrified you are of the unknown, which is the more you will stay with the status quo and protect a defunct system rather than transform the system, which is why trauma is correlated by the percentage of the speed of evolution. You traumatize an entire culture, they don't want to change. They'll cling to the abuse that they know over the adventure of the unknown, because it won't be an unknown. It'll be more overwhelming stuff they can't deal with. So within any culture, within any group, this thing is happening at an agonizingly slow pace. And there will be a call for roles in various forms of suffering at every level. If you want to create a unique system that doesn't go through the pains of this, you've got to break with the collective. Now you can do you have, of course, a couple of choices. Like when Mrs. Roberts gets the problem from a 7-year-old, she can either try to teach, she could most helpfully teach where the system is stuck and how a child could advocate for that. Or she can blame and punish or ignore the system, and nobody knows what to do, and so the system doesn't change, and more pain and more pain and more pain happens. So, so that is part of what's going on here, and it's the student can keep raising a hand and saying what's wrong, but if they get punished repeatedly, they'll stop doing that. Then the teacher won't know what's wrong, so she can't have a chance to respond, and the principal doesn't know what's wrong because the teacher stops raising her hand. And up at the top of the power structure, the governmental ego, so to speak, is always trying to put out the spin that everything's wonderful, which means they're doing a good job, and punishing everyone who says otherwise, and causing endless chronic frustration. It's good for that person at the pinnacle. It's bad for everyone else. And so, so they've got that system. What you have is a couple options. You can be within the system and compete to get a better part and leave the system unchanged. So that will better things for you personally. And, that is part of the NIMBY attitude of most Americans, for example. Well, I don't want to be in that role. No, it's fine that there are garbage people and all that smell bad, and I don't care about there being garbage people. I don't want to be one. So that can be for some other person. And it's fine that there are crappy schools for other people's children. And it's fine that there are waste incinerators for other neighborhoods than mine. And I'll do this, and I'll lie, and I'll cheat, and I'll game the system. It's like I'll study how to avoid this point and be in this point right here. Oh, this person's figured out. I'll be friends with them. I'll do this and that. So there's the direction of getting a better role, and then there's the direction of reforming the system, saying, why is it that our Vietnam veterans, having risked their lives after being lied to for a war that doesn't exist, why is it that they are being hunted with PTSD as homeless people and committing suicide at a very high rate? Why is it that that's okay with everyone? Because they're not vets. Why is that okay? That they're stuck in this transit within a crude and dysfunctional cult, that everyone just turns away from them because that's an easy thing to do until the next generation and the next idiotic war. Why is that? No. I'm going to voluntarily make my life more difficult to change the system, or to create another one, because you can create parallel systems. And that's really a lot of what I'm interested with happiness data and 10x living, is creating parallel systems. I mean, I don't care exactly how they're defined, but creating more symmetrical relationships within the dimensions of life. So that you're not, for example, going back to our addicts, our busy addicts, and our substance addicts. 1 in 7 Americans, in the current pain structure, the pain is dense enough that 1 in 7 Americans will have a substance abuse. And a good 90% or so of Americans will be compulsive around something. It may be a lie. I compulsively lie about this one thing because it's too painful. I compulsively dominate here because I feel too vulnerable. So compulsion represents a flaw in the system, and it correlates with pain, which correlates with fear. If there's no pain, you have no fear. And the more you control, the more you're afraid of pain. You're not afraid of pain unless you've got regular, unbearable exposures to it. And you're trying to avoid that. So, so when you fight to change a system and move it towards symmetry, the pain disappears. because energy flows more gracefully. When the pain disappears, coping mechanisms that are never fun. Controlling takes energy. Addiction takes energy. They're both miserable experiences. A sex addict doesn't enjoy sex very much. They feel out of control. There's a brief relief, and then it's back into the same manic hunt. It's not a fun experience to be in a coping mechanism. So you can create your own consciously symmetrical system. And the best scientific method tests the intelligence of systems. The intelligence of systems can be determined by the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Someone who can take $1 and create a year of happiness is more intelligent than someone that can take $10 million and end up killing themselves. Intelligence is the efficiency of turning energy into human well-being. And the efficiency of doing that is through a system. So you could say intelligence correlates with system design. And the intelligence of a system is determined by how much energy is required to produce a unit of human well-being within the system, measuring mental, emotional, and physical well-being in past, present, and future. So you've got a sustainable dynamic, as opposed to crack cocaine feels very good for a few hours and then feels worse than before, versus a slow and steady build that goes on for decades. So everything works out for the best in the unconscious domain of slow evolution, where the more pain is created by an idea or a mistake, the more people eventually shout, perhaps violently revolt against the pain, making the power structure uncomfortable, which then leads to change, because when the power structure has angry people at their door or can't get food or something, then, all hell breaks loose. We've got to change the system. When the power structure is comfortable and isolated and it's the other people who are suffering, well, then we can't have that. We can't have that as far as the soldiers. The power structure quite comfortable with that. And so that's the momentum of revolution, and a dictator gets thrown over. The next dictator thinks maybe I'll be a little nicer to the people, or is just as dumb and gets thrown over as well. So pain eventually, ultimately, leads to a refined system. A refined system ultimately leads to less pain, which leads to more grace, which leads to more sensitivity, which leads to more awareness, which leads to more pain in a certain sense, because you keep zooming in. That's the interesting thing, that it's not like your pain ever goes away fully, but you're at a finer level of detail, so the system is constantly becoming more graceful. Going back to that analogy where someone can be as outraged that their Tesla seat doesn't feel good after a 400-mile drive as another person could feel that, a wagon was a step up over walking on foot. Like they got to be in the wagon that day and not walk with the horses, and they felt great. And so there's this magnification process as well, and it's all part of nature. It's all the same mathematics. It's all the same algorithms running. It's just moving towards complexity. As a human being, we have the choice of pleasing our power structures by pretending that everything's fine at the edges, which means the system doesn't change. We suffer, but maybe get some perks from the power structure that, presidents like going out to the soldiers, in Iraq that fought a war that didn't need to be fought and saying, "How are you, buddy?" And the soldiers say, "Thanks for coming and seeing me, Mr. President. I'm just fine here with one stump of a leg. I feel great. Thanks for coming out here." And the president says, "Well, there's a soldier that I like." Well, obviously, as opposed to "Fuck you, Mr. President, for wasting all our time. I wish I'd never bought into your goddamn war and had to kill 10 innocent children and watch my buddy being blown up. We're not going to reward that. That's not a good soldier. We're going to define good soldiering as people who shut up and enjoy dying peacefully." And so, good for the power structure, bad for the country and the soldier. So you have a movement between seeking to please the power structure or seeking to change the power structure, between competing for the better role in a bad system or fighting and partnering to change the system so that everyone has a better role, and staying in the system and doing those various choices, or stepping outside the system, which, when the dating system in the United States got so dysfunctional that I was constantly punished for being vulnerable emotionally, I just traveled the world until I found a couple of countries where my emotions were an asset, where the more emotional I was, the more people connected with me. And since that's what I wanted, I just spent more time over there and created a bit of a system of cultural diversity, leaving this set, going over to this set. And there's still a little loyalty, meaning I mention things like this because I'm pointing out the flaws in my system. If you don't know there's a much better way of doing things, if you don't know that people in Copenhagen have a 400% higher quality of life than the average American, or even the top 50% of Americans, well, then you have nothing to object about the crudeness and stupidity of aspects of the American system, the cruelty and sociopathic inducement and traumatizing nature of aspects of the American system. And that can prompt a shake, like, let me go over to Copenhagen and measure for myself. Paid to go to college? Free health care? Minimal crime? No homeless? Better architecture? Happier in your jobs? Love your country and government? Better green energy? What's there to complain about? They don't. They love their government. They love their country. It's a stunning revelation. So I'm going to wrap this up. Everything happens for the best if you understand the unconscious biological nature of the species, which relies on miserable people playing miserable roles to be the alert back to the conscious mind that the system needs to evolve. And this system will slowly, and has been slowly evolving. There is less crime per capita, less violence per capita, longer lifespans, more choices, higher standards of living in a variety of ways. The system is grinding out with huge casualties along the way, a slow and stupid path towards some semblance of grace, and will continue to do so. And every single person in that system has a role. The whiners, the addicts, they're all part of the system. You can't see the system unless they play their role. And so you can be in the system, and you can, whatever role you're in, if you're a drug addict on Skid Row, you are evolving the system. Because if you're not there, everyone can't say, wow, I don't want to end up as a drug addict on Skid Row. What's going on there? And learn about how not to do that. So, but what's creating the drug addict on Skid Row is not some individual saying, gee, I think I'd like to be a drug addict on Skid Row. That's what I'll do for my role in life. I don't want to be a professional football player, don't want to be an amazing artist. Drug addict on Skid Row, that's what I'd like to be. No, it's a probability field. The most vulnerable, low-ranking people will be given the shittiest positions. The shittiest positions will be created by the crudeness of the system. However, even in that shitty role, you are doing something by being in the shitty role. You're motivating other people to avoid that terrain. You're leading intelligent people to ask questions. And that's what that system needs to slightly grow. So you can't fail within nature's system in that sense. But you can easily fail to live a meaningful life of self-esteem, of value, of dignity, of self, anything that you'd want to live. You can do that in a heartbeat, and you can easily find yourself tumbling where things that were worse before got worse because they were worse before, and now everyone actually gets upset if you improve your life because they're used to you being miserable, or they're comfortable with you being in this position, and now that you're adopting another position, it's upsetting their status quo, their framework that they know what's going on. Everyone wants to feel like they know what's going on so that they can protect themselves from pain. You go ahead and change. Now they realize, wait a minute, I wasn't seeing that coming. So they're terrified. They're angry. It doesn't matter that your life just got 10 times better. It's like, you're not supposed to be that. You're supposed to be the homeless guy. Now you're making more than me. Jim Carrey or whatever. And people don't like it. So they will try and push you back into the role. Get back into your role. We don't want African Americans around here. It's like, go back there. You're supposed to be the ones playing the rotten role in our crappy system. And so that's just what this system does. So we can play that. We can we can fight for a better role and stuff. But one of the best things that we can do if we're conscious of this dynamic, and it's one of the reasons I'm talking about this, is we can actually create other systems. And the beauty of even the stupidity of our mainframe systems is that they have invented the idea of science. The idea of science has been invented amidst all the pain and stupidity of this system. And it's a great idea. And science gives the basis to measure intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. And if you understand that you can design a system that is 10 times more efficient at creating well-being per unit of energy invested, and you understand system design, and you can step over here and start creating a 10x system. Admittedly, at this stage and in times, in a role where it's sometimes the next generation that gets the full benefit. You plant an oak tree today, it gives shade 30 years from now. And so, but it's either that or go along with, with the pace of the current system. And in these new systems, you can create a much wider range of people winning in many more diverse ways, with less waste and natural, and ecological suffering along the way. And so that is the choice. And in that sense, you have the ability basically to infuse your species with a higher probability field, because people will put up with the status quo of mediocrity endlessly, and they do because they're afraid of change. But as soon as you create scientific metrics to say that if you enter this system, it's this way rather than this way, and you create comparisons, then any intelligent person, once it's no longer in the unknown and it's known, wants to be in the more profitable system. Well, that creates a migration and a copycat dynamic, much like Elon Musk deliberately did with Tesla. He made his patents available. He's moving into China, well aware of their habit of technology piracy, because his goal is a more sustainable future. His goal is not to have Tesla be the biggest car company or a monopoly. And so his whole purpose is to be copied and to be, and to be challenged and to electrify the world as a better atmosphere for millions of people who are getting cancer from particulate matter to breathe. And so he's creating a new microclimate within vehicles, within solar, within space, within tunnels and transportation. This is a change of the system. And Elon Musk is one of the most important individuals in our culture for embodying and holding the torch of this method of create a new system, create Hyperloop as opposed to, a crappy railway system, that's one of the most expensive in history, which our politicians are very happy to spend public money wasting. So I hope you've enjoyed this terrain. Everything will happen for the best. Many of the roles in crappy systems will be miserable, but you can consciously create a 10x best by intervening in the system. And you can either compete to get there, get the rank. That's not a bad approach. You can fight to shift the system. That's not a bad approach. You can create a new system with small pods of people. That's never been easier with smartphone technology and information technology. I will see you around.